My mother made me pay rent of $850, and when my Golden Brothers, homeless, family moved in with us, they made my life unbearable. When I moved out, they blamed me. Hey Reddit, I really need to get this off my chest, and honestly, I'm not sure where else to turn. I'm Sam, a 25-year-old juggling part-time work, university, and trying to save some money while living at home with my parents. They charge me $850 a month for rent, which isn't cheap but is manageable, barely. My older brother Jack, though? He's 28 and doesn't pay a dime. Not for rent, not for utilities, not even for groceries. He's the golden boy of the family, and it's driving me insane. Growing up, Jack always got the best of everything. New clothes, the latest gadgets, expensive trips, all while I got hand-me-downs and maybe next time promises. I used to think it was because he was older, but it's the same story now. Jack is unemployed, living in the same house as me, and gets away with doing absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, I'm working my ass off just to stay afloat, and my parents act like he's a saint. Last year, Jack borrowed my dad's car without asking, got into an accident, and totaled it. My parents? They covered for him. My dad even bought a new car and said, "We all make mistakes." Meanwhile, if I so much as forget to take out the trash, I get lectured about responsibility. Last week, I came home from a brutal double shift at work. My feet were killing me, and I just wanted to grab a quick dinner and pass out. I walked into the kitchen, and Jack was there with two of his friends, drinking beers and laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. The table was piled with empty takeout boxes and beer bottles, stuff I knew my parents would expect me to clean up. "Hey, Sam," Jack said, grinning like he owned the place. "Why don't you join us?" "Oh wait, you've got work tomorrow, don't you?" His friends laughed, and I just stood there, exhausted and furious. "Maybe if you worked, you'd understand what that's like," I snapped. Jack didn't like that. "Lighten up, man. It's not my fault you're stuck with your crappy job." I wanted to yell, but I bit my tongue and left the room. What's the point? Jack always wins. Except this time, things escalated. The next morning, I woke up to my mom banging on my door. She stormed in, holding a shattered beer bottle. "Sam, why would you do this?" she demanded. "Do what?" I asked, still groggy. "Break Jack's beer bottle and leave it in the living room. You could have hurt someone." I sat up, confused. That wasn't me. I wasn't even in the living room last night, but she wasn't having it. Jack had told her I flipped out after our argument and smashed the bottle. He even claimed I threatened him in front of his friends. None of it was true, but my mom believed him without question. I tried to defend myself, but she cut me off with, "Why can't you just get along with your brother?" It was like a switch flipped in me. "Why do you always take his side?" I shouted. "He's a liar, and you know it. He's been lying his whole life, and you let him walk all over you, and me." My dad came in at that point and told me to calm down and stop overreacting. Overreacting? I was being accused of something I didn't do, and Jack was sitting in the next room, probably smirking. I spent the rest of the day stewing in my room, trying to figure out how to prove my innocence. That's when I remembered something. We had a security camera in the living room. My dad installed it a few months ago after a break-in down the street. I logged into the system from my laptop and scrolled through the footage from the night before. And there it was. Jack's friend knocked over the beer bottle while dancing around like an idiot. Jack laughed, picked up the bottle, and smashed it on purpose. Then he turned to the camera, gave a mock bow, and said, "Sorry, Sammy." I felt my blood boil. He knew the camera was there. He wanted to frame me. I marched downstairs with my laptop, ready to confront my parents. They were in the kitchen, having coffee like it was just another peaceful morning. "I need to show you something," I said, opening the laptop and playing the footage. My mom's face went pale, and my dad just stared, speechless. When the clip ended, I said, "So, still think I'm overreacting?" My mom started to say something, but I cut her off. "No, let me talk for once. Jack has been lying and manipulating you for years, and you let him. You've made excuse after excuse for him, while I've been busting my ass to prove I'm worth something. But apparently, the only thing that matters in this house is Jack's feelings." My dad finally spoke up. "We didn't know, Sam. We're sorry. But I didn't want an apology. I want to change." For a few days, things seemed to shift. My parents were colder toward Jack, and I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd finally see him for who he was. But then the guilt trip started. "Sam, you know Jack's been struggling," my mom said one night. "Maybe we should just let this go." "Struggling? He's been freeloading off you for years." I snapped. "Family sticks together," she said quietly. That's when I realized nothing would change. Jack would always be their golden boy, and I'd always be the scapegoat. Hey Reddit, it's me again. Things at home went from bad to worse recently, and I honestly feel like I'm losing my mind. If I thought dealing with Jack on his own was a nightmare, dealing with Jack, his wife, and their 3 kids is an entirely different level of hell. Let me explain how we got here. It started a few months ago when Jack suddenly announced that he, his wife Ashley, and their kids needed to move in with us. According to Jack, they were having temporary financial difficulties. Temporary, my ass. Jack's been jobless for years, and Ashley works part-time at some boutique, barely bringing in enough to cover groceries. I knew this wasn't going to be a short-term arrangement, no matter what he claimed. My parents, of course, welcomed them with open arms. "Family is family," my mom said, like she was reciting some kind of holy mantra. Meanwhile, I was sitting there thinking, what about me? Am I not family? Why do I have to keep paying $850 a month while Jack gets a free ride? I brought it up once, and my mom just brushed me off with, "You're young and single. You can handle it," like being responsible was some kind of punishment. The chaos started the day they moved in. Jack didn't even bother to help with the unloading. He just sat on the porch, drinking a soda, while Ashley directed a couple of his friends who'd come to help. The kids, Sophie, age 7, Leo, age 5, and Ella, age 3, were running wild, screaming and chasing each other through the yard. I tried to stay out of the way, but it didn't matter. My room is right next to the front door, so every time someone came in or out, it felt like a herd of elephants was stomping past me. By the end of the day, the house was a disaster. Boxes were piled everywhere, toys were scattered across the living room, and the smell of fast food lingered in the air. My mom was already fussing over Jack and Ashley, asking if they needed anything else, while I sat there, invisible as usual. The next morning, I woke up to chaos. Sophie and Leo were in the hallway outside my room, arguing over some toy. Ella was wailing because she wanted cereal, and Ashley was shouting at Jack to get off his lazy ass and help for once. I groaned and rolled over, hoping they'd quiet down, but no such luck. 5 minutes later, Leo barged into my room like he owned the place. "Get out," I snapped, sitting up. He just stared at me, holding some sticky action figure. "Mommy said you have candy." "I don't have candy." "Get out." He didn't move until I physically got out of bed and escorted him to the door. By the time I got back to my bed, I was wide awake and furious. It was 7 a.m. on my day off, and I couldn't even sleep in my own house. This became a daily occurrence. The kids had no sense of boundaries, and Jack and Ashley did nothing to stop them. If anything, they encouraged it. One afternoon, I came home from work to find Sophie sitting at my desk, drawing on my important school papers. My laptop was open, and she'd managed to spill juice on the keyboard. "What are you doing?" I shouted, rushing over to assess the damage. "Mommy said I could use your desk," she said, completely unfazed. I stormed into the living room, where Ashley was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "Can you please keep your kids out of my room?" I demanded. She barely looked up. "Oh, relax. Sophie's just a kid. She didn't mean any harm. She ruined my schoolwork and spilled juice on my laptop." "Well, maybe you shouldn't leave your stuff lying around," she said, like it was somehow my fault. I looked to Jack for backup, but he just shrugged. "They're kids, man. What do you expect?" It was like talking to a brick wall. No matter how many times I complained, nothing changed. If anything, it got worse. The kids started treating my room like their personal playground. I'd come home to find toys scattered everywhere, my bed unmade, and sticky fingerprints on everything. Once, they even got into my work bag and scribbled all over my notes for an important presentation. I tried locking my door, but that only made things worse. Jack accused me of making the kids feel unwelcome, and my mom said I was being selfish and ungrateful. Selfish? for wanting a little privacy in my own room. It was insane. The noise was another issue. Between the kids screaming, Ashley blasting reality TV shows all day, and Jack's obnoxious video game marathons, there was no peace. I'd put on headphones and try to focus on my schoolwork, but it was impossible. Even at night, there was no escape. The walls in our house are thin, and Jack and Ashley's arguments would echo through the halls. They fought about everything: money, parenting, chores, and their shouting matches often ended with Ashley slamming doors and Jack storming out to smoke on the porch. One night, I came home late from work, exhausted and desperate for some quiet. As soon as I walked in the door, I heard crying. Ella was having a meltdown because Sophie wouldn't share a toy, and Ashley was yelling at Jack to do something for once. I sighed and headed to the kitchen, only to find that all the food I'd bought for myself was gone. My frozen dinners, my snacks, even the orange juice I'd labeled with my name. It was all gone. I confronted Jack, who was sprawled on the couch, playing a video game. "Did you eat my food?" I demanded. He didn't even pause the game. "The kids were hungry. Then buy your own groceries," I shouted. "We're struggling, man. Have a little compassion," he said, like he was some kind of martyr. I turned to my mom, who was sitting in her usual spot at the kitchen table. "This isn't fair. I'm paying rent, I'm buying my own food, and they're just taking everything." She gave me that same tired look she always does. "They're going through a tough time, Sam. You need to be more understanding." Understanding. That word makes my blood boil now. I've been understanding my whole life, and where has it gotten me? I'm still treated like a second-class citizen in my own home, while Jack gets away with everything. The final straw came last week. I came home to find my door wide open and the kids jumping on my bed. My TV was on, and they'd managed to crack the screen. My gaming console was gone. Turns out Jack had borrowed it to sell for extra cash. That was it for me. I yelled at Jack, Ashley, my mom, and anyone else who would listen. I told them I was done being treated like a doormat. My mom tried to calm me down, saying I was overreacting and being dramatic. Jack just smirked and said, "Relax, man. It's just stuff. You can always buy more." Hey Reddit, it's Sam again. I didn't think things at home could get worse, but somehow they did. If you followed my previous posts, you already know how bad the situation with my brother Jack, his wife Ashley, and their 3 kids has been. Well, strap in, because what's happened recently has left me questioning whether I should just pack up and leave, even if it means living out of my car. It all started when my parents pulled me aside for a talk. Whenever they do this, I know it's bad news. Sure enough, my mom sat me down at the kitchen table with her serious, "we're a family" expression, and my dad stood behind her like he was her backup. "Sam," my mom started, "you know things have been tight lately, with everything going up in price." I nodded cautiously. I knew where this was heading, but I let her continue. "Your dad and I were talking, and we think it would be fair if you started contributing a little more. Maybe $1,000 a month, starting next month." I blinked, stunned. "You want me to pay more? I'm already giving you $850 every month." "Jack doesn't pay anything." My mom's expression tightened, and my dad looked away like he was trying to avoid the inevitable confrontation. "Jack and Ashley are in a difficult spot right now. You know that. They have 3 kids to take care of, and that's my problem, how?" I shot back, feeling my frustration bubble over. "I'm already paying rent while they freeload. I buy my own groceries. I cover all my own expenses. You're asking me to subsidize them, too?" "Sam," my dad finally said, "we're all a family. Families support each other." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were really trying to guilt me into paying more while Jack and Ashley contributed absolutely nothing. It felt like they were punishing me for being the responsible one. "So, let me get this straight," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I'm supposed to work harder, pay more, and go without so Jack can keep sitting on his ass playing video games all day? That's not fair, Sam," my mom said sharply. "Jack's doing the best he can." "No, he's not," I snapped. "He's doing the bare minimum, and you're enabling him. I'm not going to keep picking up his slack." The conversation ended with my mom storming off and my dad muttering something about me being ungrateful. I thought that would be the end of it, but of course it wasn't. Over the next few days, they started ramping up the pressure. My mom would leave little comments at dinner like, "If only everyone could pull their weight," and "It's a shame some people can't be more supportive." Jack, meanwhile, took every opportunity to rub salt in the wound. One evening, as I was heading out the door to work, Jack stopped me in the hallway. "Hey, Sam, you got an extra $20? Ashley needs gas money." I stared at him, incredulous. "Why would I give you money?" He shrugged, smirking. "You're making good money, right? Help your big bro out. Maybe if you got a job, you wouldn't need my help." I shot back, pushing past him. That night, I came home to find Ashley in my room. My stomach dropped when I saw her rifling through my desk drawers. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. She jumped, dropping a stack of my papers onto the floor. "Oh, I was just looking for a pen," she said, like it was no big deal. "In my private desk?" Without asking? I was furious. This was the one space in the house that was supposed to be mine, and she was invading it like it was her right. Ashley didn't even bother apologizing. "Relax, Sam. You're so uptight. It's just a pen." I spent the rest of the night trying to calm down, but the next morning, things escalated even further. I was in the kitchen, pouring myself a cup of coffee, when I heard my mom and Ashley whispering in the living room. Curiosity got the better of me, so I leaned around the corner to listen. "He doesn't need all that space," Ashley was saying. "We could easily fit Ella's crib in there." "You're probably right," my mom agreed. "Sam's always at work or school anyway. He won't even notice." I froze, my heart racing. They were talking about moving Ella's crib into my room. Without even asking me, I stormed into the living room, glaring at both of them. "You've got to be kidding me." They looked up, startled. "Sam, we were just—" my mom started, but I cut her off. "You were just planning to shove a crib into my room like it's a storage closet? Without even talking to me first?" "Sam, don't be so dramatic," Ashley said, rolling her eyes. "We're just trying to make things work. You don't need all that space. It's my room." I shouted. "I'm paying rent for it, remember? If anyone should be moving, it's you." That set Ashley off. She started yelling about how hard things were for her and Jack, how ungrateful I was, and how I didn't understand what it was like to have kids. My mom jumped in, trying to play peacemaker, but I wasn't having it. "I'm done," I said, turning to my mom. "If you let them move that crib into my room, I'm leaving. I don't care where I go, but I'm not staying here." My mom looked like I'd slapped her. "Sam, you don't mean that." "Yes, I do," I said firmly. "I'm not going to keep sacrificing my sanity so Jack and Ashley can take over this house. If you won't stand up to them, I will." The tension in the room was suffocating. Ashley stormed out, muttering something about how selfish I was, and my mom just sat there, looking defeated. I went back to my room, slamming the door behind me, and started looking up apartments online. I don't know how I'm going to afford it, but anything has to be better than this. That night, Jack tried to confront me. He banged on my door, shouting about how I was making things harder for everyone and how I didn't understand what it meant to be part of a family. I didn't even bother responding. I just put on my headphones and ignored him until he gave up and went away. I don't know when exactly I made the decision to leave. Maybe it was the moment my mom tried to guilt me into sharing my room with a crib. Maybe it was Jack's smug smirk when he overheard her plan and didn't bother to defend me. Or maybe it was 1,000 smaller moments of realizing that, no matter what I did, I'd never be more than an afterthought in my own family. Whatever the case, I decided I was done. The first step was finding a place to live, which was easier said than done. I didn't have much in savings. Most of my money went toward rent and school, but I was determined to make it work. I started scouring apartment listings online during breaks at work, jotting down notes on anything that seemed remotely affordable. Most of the options were terrible. Tiny studios with no kitchen. Roommates who wanted to split a single bedroom. One place looked decent until I read the reviews, which described cockroaches the size of small dogs and a landlord who never fixed anything. Just when I was starting to lose hope, I found a listing for a one-bedroom apartment about 8 kilometers from my university. It wasn't perfect, it was further than I wanted, and the rent was at the top of my budget, but it looked clean and safe. I decided to check it out. The landlord, Mrs. Patel, was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who seemed impressed by the fact that I had a steady job and was a student. "We get a lot of flakes around here," she said, handing me the key to check out the unit. "But you seem responsible." I stepped inside and immediately felt a sense of relief. The apartment wasn't fancy, but it was quiet and clean. A small kitchen opened into a living room with a big window that let in plenty of light. The bedroom was just big enough for my bed and desk, and the bathroom, though small, was spotless. Most importantly, it was mine. Or it could be. Mrs. Patel was waiting in the hallway when I came out. "What do you think?" she asked. "I'll take it," I said, not even hesitating. She nodded like she'd expected as much. "You can move in at the end of the week. First and last month's rent, plus a security deposit." I winced at the total but nodded. It was going to wipe out my savings, but I'd figure out a way to manage. I was determined to get out of my parents' house, no matter the cost. The next challenge was moving. I didn't want to make a big announcement about it. I knew my family would try to talk me out of it or, worse, guilt me into staying. Instead, I decided to do it gradually, sneaking out a few boxes at a time until I was ready to leave for good. The first time I packed a box, I felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. I'd lived in that house my whole life, and leaving felt like stepping into the unknown. But as I taped the box shut and labeled it kitchen stuff, I also felt a surge of determination. This was my chance to start over, to build a life where I wasn't constantly overshadowed by Jack and his chaos. The biggest challenge was timing. My family was always around, so finding moments when I could quietly pack and sneak boxes to my car was tricky. I started doing it late at night, after everyone else was asleep. I'd wait until the house was quiet, then tiptoe to my room and carefully load a box or two into the trunk of my car. My heart would race every time the floor creaked, but no one ever caught me. One night, though, I had a close call. I was carrying a box of books out to my car when Jack came outside for a smoke. He squinted at me through the darkness, his cigarette glowing like a firefly. "What are you doing?" he asked, his tone suspicious. "Just taking some stuff to donate," I lied, hoping he wouldn't press further. He shrugged and took a drag on his cigarette. "Whatever." I held my breath until he went back inside, then quickly loaded the box and drove off. It was a small victory, but it felt like a big one. By the time move-in day arrived, I'd already transported most of my belongings to the new apartment. The only things left were my bed, desk, and a few odds and ends. I decided to tackle those all at once, figuring it would be easier to rip off the Band-Aid than drag it out. The morning of the move, I told my parents I was going out for the day. My mom barely looked up from her coffee. Jack was sprawled on the couch, playing video games, and didn't even acknowledge me. It was almost laughable how little they cared. My new neighbor, Brian, was a lifesaver. He was in his early 30s, with a friendly smile and a beat-up truck that he offered to help me use for the heavier stuff. We spent the afternoon hauling furniture up the narrow staircase to my apartment, chatting about everything from work to hobbies. "You're lucky to get out," Brian said as we wrestled my mattress through the door. "Living with family can be a nightmare." "You have no idea," I said, laughing despite myself. By the time we finished, I was exhausted but happy. I looked around my new apartment, now filled with my things, and felt a sense of accomplishment. This was my space, and no one could take it away from me. That night, as I lay in my bed for the first time in my new home, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, definitely, but also a lingering sadness. I'd spent so long trying to earn my parents' approval, and now I was leaving without it. But as I stared at the ceiling, I realized something important. I didn't need their approval anymore. I was finally free to live my life on my own terms. Of course, freedom came with its own challenges. The next morning, I woke up to a text from my mom. "Where are you? You didn't come home last night." I hesitated before replying. I didn't want to lie, but I also didn't want to deal with the inevitable fallout. Finally, I texted back, "I moved out. I'll explain later." I thought moving out would be the hardest part, but I was wrong. The real challenge began the day after my absence was finally noticed. I'd expected some reaction from my family, but I wasn't prepared for just how quickly the accusations and guilt trips would start flooding in. The morning after my first night in my new apartment, my phone buzzed incessantly. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was spam or a work-related message. But when I finally checked, I saw a flurry of missed calls and texts from my mom. The first message read, "Sam, where are you? Did you stay out all night?" Then came the follow-ups, each more frantic than the last. "Answer me, Sam. We need to talk right now." And finally, "You better not have done something stupid like move out without telling us." I sighed, knowing I couldn't avoid this forever. I texted her back. "I moved out. I'll explain later. Please respect my decision." The response was immediate. My phone started ringing, and I hesitated for a moment before answering. I figured I might as well rip the Band-Aid off. "What do you mean you moved out?" my mom demanded as soon as I picked up. Her voice was a mix of anger and panic, the same tone she used when I was a kid and she thought I'd broken something valuable. "I mean, I moved out," I said calmly. "I found an apartment. I'm on my own now." "And you didn't think to tell us?" she snapped. "You just left without saying a word? Do you know how selfish that is?" I rubbed my temples, already exhausted by the conversation. "I didn't tell you because I knew you'd try to talk me out of it. I need this, Mom. I can't keep living in that house with everything that's been going on." "What's been going on?" she asked, as if she genuinely had no idea. "We've always supported you, Sam. You're the one walking away from your family." I laughed bitterly. Supported me? By charging me rent while Jack gets a free ride? By letting his kids destroy my stuff and treating me like I'm the bad guy for wanting basic respect? "Jack's struggling," she said defensively. "You know that. And he has a family to take care of. And I have a life to live." I shot back. "I can't keep sacrificing my sanity and my future to cover for his mistakes." The line went quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe she was finally listening. But then she said, "You're betraying your family, Sam. I never thought you'd be this selfish." That word, selfish, hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't the first time she'd used it, but hearing it now, after everything I'd been through, felt like a punch to the gut. I ended the call before she could say anything else, my hands shaking with frustration. The messages didn't stop there. My dad texted me later that afternoon, his tone less accusatory but no less disappointing. "Are you sure about this, Sam? Your mom's really upset. You could have handled this better." Even Jack chimed in with a snarky text. "Good luck paying rent, loser. Don't come crawling back when you realize you can't make it on your own." I ignored most of them, focusing instead on settling into my new apartment. But it wasn't easy to shake the weight of their words. As much as I wanted to move on, part of me still craved their approval, even though I knew I'd never get it. A few days later, I got a surprise visit from Jack. I came home from work to find him leaning against my apartment door, his arms crossed and a smug look on his face. "What are you doing here?" I asked, not bothering to hide my irritation. "Thought I'd check out your new place," he said, pushing past me as I unlocked the door. Not bad for someone who's abandoning his family. I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to kick him out then and there. "What do you want, Jack?" He flopped onto my couch like he owned the place, his casual demeanor making my blood boil. "Well, since you're all independent now, I figured you could help me out." I laughed, the sound sharp and humorless. "Help you out? You've got to be kidding me." "I'm serious," he said, his tone suddenly earnest. "Things are tight at home, and Ashley's been on my case about money. You're making decent cash, right? You could throw a little our way." I stared at him, stunned by the audacity. "You want me to support you? After everything you've put me through?" "Come on, man," he said, leaning forward like he was trying to appeal to some brotherly bond that had never existed. "We're family." "Family," I repeated, my voice rising. "You don't get to play that card with me. Not after you spent years treating me like dirt." His expression darkened, and he stood up, getting in my face. "You think you're better than me now, don't you? Just because you ran away like a coward." "I think I'm done letting you and Mom and Dad walk all over me." I shot back. "Now get out of my apartment." He didn't move right away, his jaw clenched as if he was debating whether to push the issue. But finally, he grabbed his jacket and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the small space, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts. I knew this wasn't the end. My family wasn't going to let me go quietly, and part of me wondered if I was strong enough to withstand the storm. But as I looked around my apartment, at the modest space I'd worked so hard to make my own, I felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in my life, I was free to make my own choices. And no matter what my family said or did, I wasn't going to give that up. The calls and messages continued for weeks. My mom alternated between begging me to come home and accusing me of destroying the family. My dad tried to play mediator, urging me to find a way to make peace. Jack sent the occasional taunting text, reminding me how much harder life would be without their support. But slowly, the noise began to fade. I stopped answering their calls and started focusing on myself, my job, my classes, and my future. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I doubted my decision. But every time I walked through the door of my apartment, I felt a sense of relief that reminded me why I'd left. For the first time in years, I was living for myself. And that, I realized, was worth everything. Settling into my new apartment felt like waking up from a long, exhausting dream. For the first time in years, I had peace. No screaming kids, no guilt trips from my mom, no smug comments from Jack. Just quiet. It was a little strange at first, like I didn't quite know what to do with myself. But as the days passed, I realized how much I'd been craving this solitude. The apartment was small but perfect for me. The walls were freshly painted, a soft beige that felt soothing after the chaos of my family's house. I'd placed my desk by the big living room window, and in the evenings, I'd sit there with my laptop, watching the sunset while I worked or studied. My bedroom was modest but cozy, with just enough space for my bed, a small dresser, and a nightstand. The kitchen was functional, though I wasn't much of a cook. Still, it felt good to stock the fridge with my own groceries, knowing no one would eat them without asking. Rent was $700 a month, $150 less than what I'd been paying at home, and the best part? I didn't even have to cover the whole amount. Brian, my neighbor from across the hall, had been looking for a way to cut costs and suggested we share the unit. At first, I was hesitant. I wasn't sure if I wanted to share my new space with someone else. But Brian turned out to be a great roommate. He was laid back but responsible, the kind of guy who washed his dishes and didn't leave his laundry sitting in the dryer for days. We split the bills evenly, and he even offered to help me furnish the apartment by lending me an old coffee table and a bookshelf he didn't need. Brian and I quickly became friends. He worked as a graphic designer for a marketing firm, and we'd often sit in the living room after dinner, talking about work or our plans for the future. One evening, over a couple of beers, I mentioned my dream of starting a tech company. "I've been thinking about this for a while," I said, feeling a little nervous admitting it out loud. "I want to create a startup, something in the tech space. I've got a few ideas, but I don't know where to start." Brian's eyes lit up. "Dude, that's awesome. What kind of tech?" "Well, I've been brainstorming a platform for freelancers," I said. "Something that combines job listings, project management tools, and payment processing in one place. Kind of like a one-stop shop for independent contractors." "That's brilliant," Brian said, leaning forward. "You know, I could help you with the branding and UI design. That's kind of my thing." The conversation snowballed from there. By the end of the night, we'd sketched out a rough plan on a napkin, and I felt more excited about the future than I had in years. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. During the day, I juggled my part-time job and classes, but in the evenings, I threw myself into building the foundation for the startup. I taught myself coding basics online, spent hours researching market trends, and started drafting a business plan. Brian was true to his word, helping me design a sleek logo and user interface mockups. We even came up with a name for the platform, IndieHub. My new life wasn't without its challenges. Balancing work, school, and the startup wasn't easy, and there were nights when I barely slept. Money was still tight, and I had to make some sacrifices, cutting back on eating out, skipping social events, and sticking to a strict budget. But for the first time, those sacrifices felt worth it. I was building something for myself, something that could actually make a difference. I kept my distance from my family during this time. It wasn't easy. Part of me still felt guilty for leaving the way I did. But every time I thought about reaching out, I'd remember the chaos I'd left behind and remind myself why I'd made the decision to move. I wasn't ready to let them back into my life. Not yet. Of course, They didn't make it easy. My mom called and texted me regularly, leaving guilt-laden voicemails about how much she missed me and how I was breaking her heart. My dad sent the occasional email, more measured in tone but still pushing the same message. Your mom's really upset, Sam. Can't you just come home for dinner and talk things out? Even Jack found ways to needle me, sending snide texts like, how's the big independent life going? Bet you're already regretting leaving. I ignored them as best I could, focusing instead on the life I was building. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like myself again, or maybe for the first time. I spent quiet evenings reading or working on IndieHub. I started jogging in the mornings, enjoying the crisp air and the freedom of being alone with my thoughts. I even began making new friends, joining a local coding meetup where I connected with people who shared my passion for tech. One of those new friends was Sarah, a software developer who worked for a small gaming company. We met at a meetup one night, and I was immediately struck by her sharp wit and easy laugh. We started chatting about our favorite games and ended up collaborating on a small project for the group. She had an intuitive grasp of coding that made me feel like a beginner, but she never made me feel small for asking questions. After the meetup, she offered to help me refine the back end of IndieHub. We spent hours working together at a nearby coffee shop, and somewhere along the way, our collaboration turned into something more. It wasn't official, yet, but there was a spark between us that made me look forward to each day. As the weeks turned into months, I felt a growing sense of pride in what I was accomplishing. IndieHub was slowly taking shape, and while it was still far from finished, the progress we'd made was tangible. I'd created a life that was mine, free from the weight of my family's expectations and the chaos of Jack's freeloading. For the first time, I felt like I was truly in control. It's been months since I moved out, and life feels different. Better, in so many ways, but also strange. I've spent so much of my life trying to earn my family's approval, bending over backward to please them, that I almost don't know what to do now that I'm no longer in their orbit. But for the first time in as long as I can remember, I feel like I can breathe. The turning point came one quiet evening in my new apartment. I was sitting at my desk, working on some updates for IndieHub. The interface was starting to come together, and Brian had just sent over a sleek new logo design. Sarah had helped me implement a feature I'd been struggling with for weeks, and I was finally seeing the platform take shape. For the first time, it felt real, like this idea I'd been carrying around for years might actually become something. As I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen, it hit me. None of this would have been possible if I'd stayed. If I'd let myself get sucked back into the endless drama of my family's house, I'd still be stuck in that cycle of resentment and frustration, with no energy left for my own dreams. That realization brought a strange mix of emotions. Pride, definitely, but also a lingering sadness. As much as I tried to distance myself, part of me still wanted my parents to see me, to really see me, for who I was and what I was trying to build. I knew better than to expect it, but the longing was still there, like an old wound that hadn't quite healed. I thought back to a conversation I'd had with Sarah a few weeks earlier. We were sitting on a park bench after one of our late-night coding sessions, sipping coffee and watching the stars. "You've been quiet tonight," she said, nudging me with her elbow. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated, not sure how to put it into words. "Do you ever feel like you're fighting for something that doesn't exist?" I finally asked. Like, no matter how hard you try, you'll never get what you're looking for? She was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I used to feel that way," she said. "With my parents. I spent years trying to live up to their expectations, but no matter what I did, it was never enough. It took me a long time to realize that their approval wasn't the validation I needed. I had to find that for myself." Her words stuck with me. At the time, I wasn't sure if I could ever get to that place, where my worth wasn't tied to my family's opinion. But sitting there in my apartment, surrounded by the life I was building for myself, I finally understood what she meant. The fallout from my decision to leave hadn't been easy. My mom still called occasionally, leaving voicemails full of thinly veiled guilt trips. "We're all struggling without you here, Sam," she'd say. Or, "Your father and I just want to understand why you've chosen to distance yourself from us." The subtext was always the same. "You've let us down." Jack's messages, when they came, were predictably cruel. He'd send texts like, "Guess you think you're too good for us now. Don't forget where you came from." I'd stopped responding months ago, but the messages still left a bitter taste in my mouth. But the biggest surprise was my dad. For most of my life, he'd been the quiet one, letting my mom and Jack dominate the conversations while he stayed in the background. But one day, he called me out of the blue. "Hey, Sam," he said, his voice softer than I'd expected. "Do you have a minute?" I hesitated, unsure where this was going. "Yeah, I guess. I just wanted to say," he paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "I know things have been hard between us, and I know we haven't always treated you fairly." The admission caught me off guard. "What are you saying, Dad?" "I'm saying I'm proud of you," he said, "for standing up for yourself, for chasing your dreams. I don't think I ever told you that enough." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. My dad wasn't the type to talk about feelings, and hearing him say those words felt like a weight lifting off my chest. But it also brought up a wave of sadness. Why had it taken so long for him to say it? And why did it feel so conditional, like he was only saying it now because I'd finally walked away? "Thanks, Dad," I said finally, my voice tight. "That means a lot." We talked for a few more minutes, mostly small talk about work and school, before he hung up. I sat there for a long time afterward, staring at my phone and wondering what to make of the conversation. It felt like a step forward, but also a reminder of how far we still had to go. Despite the lingering complications with my family, my life was better than it had ever been. The apartment was quiet, peaceful, and entirely mine. I had a routine that I loved. Mornings spent jogging or working on Indie Hub, afternoons at my part-time job, and evenings hanging out with Brian or Sarah. For the first time, I felt like I was living life on my own terms. One of the biggest changes was my mindset. I stopped measuring my worth by my family's approval and started focusing on my own goals. I poured myself into Indie Hub, refining the platform and preparing for a soft launch. Brian and Sarah were incredibly supportive, cheering me on every step of the way. Their belief in me was a stark contrast to the doubt I'd grown up with, and it made all the difference. There were still moments when I missed my family, or at least the idea of what family should be. But those moments were fewer and farther between. Each day, I felt more confident in my decision to set boundaries, to prioritize my own well-being over their expectations. As the weeks turned into months, I started to see the results of my hard work. Indie Hub gained traction among freelancers, and I began receiving positive feedback from early users. It wasn't perfect, and there was still a long way to go, but the progress was tangible. For the first time, I felt like I was building something that mattered, not just to me, but to others as well. Looking back, I realized that leaving my family's house wasn't just about escaping the chaos. It was about reclaiming my life, my dreams, and my sense of self. I'd spent so many years trying to fit into a mold that wasn't made for me, and breaking free from that had been the hardest and most rewarding thing I'd ever done.